Hello, everybody, and welcome to Week 10 episode of the Talk-Ons. That's right, we're back after a hiatus. We've got a few things to talk about for you guys. Culture is one of the topics. And is that word being used too much? Do we really understand culture as a football community anymore? Expectations is another thing to talk about. Is your team really as bad as you think? And are they as good as you actually think? And then the last thing is the AP, and we all know the AP. I think everybody can agree they just absolutely crapped the bed this week on that. And we'll talk about that, and we'll give what we think is a better top 15 and maybe what they should have done in the lower part of the rankings as well. So, but let me introduce ourselves once again. I am Chase, aka Dandy Vandy. Little shout out to Vanderbilt. I think the AP screwed them over as well. And then we have my co-host,
Cam, aka Crimson Cried. Way.
I don't know where we're going into the Donald Trump impression.
It's so hard to be a Bama fan. Way.
I don't know
Anyway,
why we're
you
doing
went.
Donald Trump right now. I don't know why we're doing this. We're trying to really reach to the people. He was here in Atlanta the other day.
You went so deep into that synopsis, like that overview, we didn't even get to introduce ourselves properly.
No, so you got to do it just right, man. Introduce yourself after the synopsis, because the introduction is just for the people who are new.
Because we're
So
professionals.
we're professionals.
And that's why we took a bye week. And we're so inconsistent because we're professionals.
Exactly.
That's
We're
what it
professionals
takes.
in other things in life, not
That's what it
this.
takes to be pro. We're professionals and we're objectively correct.
And we
Remember
totally have
that.
taken that entire bye week to actually prepare ourselves properly for this episode.
Exactly. So, yeah, we're back, baby. And this is our not going to be so much of a reactions video because we kind of have been lagging behind on the reactions timeline. But we are going to do a re-rank. We're going to adjust our official Talk-Ons top 15 and where we think the top 15 best teams really are.
Yep.
But we got a state of the sport segment that we're going to talk about today. We haven't done state of the sport in a while. I think the last time we did it was our very first podcast episode, but we're going to talk about that today. So we got a couple of topics to fit into the state of the sport.
Yep. State of the sport. It's been a long time. Need to talk about that, especially because of what's been going on here in the middle of the season. So do we want to just go ahead and get started on talking about culture and what we our thoughts on that?
It's a buzzword. Let's talk about it. Let's talk about how much it's being used. I
I
don't know
think
why
the
we're doing
American
this
people.
impression.
I think the American people are confusing culture with parenting. It's just not right.
You make a good point there, Mr. Trump.
Here we go. Listen, let me be clear. Culture is something. Okay, all right. Anyways,
Hey,
so culture.
Obama.
Hey, Peter, you need to
All
understand
right, all
culture.
right.
Get a little ahead of ourselves here.
Yeah,
Anyways,
we're and look at how cultured we are to be talking on this topic.
hey man, you got the
Football
impressions you
culture.
do. Football
Let's talk
culture is
about
what we're
football
talking about.
culture.
Yeah, I think we need to specify that we're not here to talk about um, cultures and diversity in the nation. We're to football culture. So, anyways, um,
Football.
what is culture? Is the question. What is football culture, and what does it govern? How does it affect your play on the field and in your practice off the field? Um, First things first, I think we can all agree that culture is exactly how you present yourselves as a team, how you treat each other within that, and the mentality you have going in to any game, any practice. It's usually on the coaching staff to try and build a culture and make sure that the kids, the students, the players, everybody's bought in. and ready to implement as much of fight and effort as they can and always give 110%. I think that's exactly, or at least that's good culture. Obviously, that's what you're trying to shoot for, I think, is
Mm.
good culture. So, and if you have any other input on what you think maybe should be added into that.
I think that's pretty close to, I mean, what I was going to say. Um, I pretty much just, the way I see it is like, I guess, in a more simplistic sense, in terms of the way I define football culture is, as you said, how the players present themselves, how they treat each other as a team, how they represent their program on the
Let's say one.
field.
I was about to say one more thing. On the field is a key word, and that's something we'll get to.
On the field, how they represent their program on the field, because that is the essence definitively of what a football culture is. It's how you represent your team on the field, in the training room, in the film room, in the press conferences, uh, in practice. You know, it's the mindset and behavior set that you carry in those aspects. And obviously, like the biggest spotlight for a team's culture is, you know, when they're playing the games, how they react, how they behave, their mentality throughout games towards their teammates and their opponents. um you know, the things that they think and say about each other and their opponents, like in press conferences, like I said. So it's just how you represent your team in a football context, and everything and that is entailed in a football context. And I think I'm just going to top it off with anything that happens outside of a football context, anything that's unrelated to the team and football, um, is that's irrelevant. That's not part of football culture. Um, and obviously, people who have seen some of our episodes or know us will know that we are Georgia fans, as we have disclosed. And obviously, this is a touchy topic for us. But I feel like we've wanted to talk about this for a while, and I feel like we've held off on it too
Yeah.
long. But I think it's time to talk about people throwing around this whole Kirby and the culture thing because of these kids getting into trouble
Yeah.
outside of school and outside of football. It's,
I
you
think,
know,
and
come
I
on now.
think George is a perfect example, though, which is why even if we weren't fans, I'd probably bring him up either way because you know they've represented, especially with the way they handled Texas, they've represented the mentality of football culture and separating that from outside culture. Yes, I think to some degree, very small degree, and I'll explain why what you do outside kind of has some bearing on football culture. But I don't think it's that player and their decision, drag racing or whatever. Let's use that as an example because we're talking about Georgia. Speeding tickets, drag racing, all this kind of stuff. It's like people are saying there's some culture problem at Georgia because of that, or they've said there could be a culture problem. Yeah, you get in trouble, you've taken yourself away from the team or maybe done something but football culture then at this point is not that has nothing to do with the football culture. At this point, the bearing on football culture, what Kirby Smart can do as a coach in this case is how can he have his team respond to what that player has done? There's nothing you can do about that player, what they do all off the field and whatnot. Like we've said time and time again, and
Right.
we'll say it right now for the fans who believe that, or anybody outside that believes there's a culture problem and Kirby Smart's losing control of the team or whatever in any way. Obviously, hopefully, a lot of that's been shut down after the Texas game, but it was really starting to pop up a lot because Georgia was struggling to capitalize like they needed to and play teams like they should have, and then the whole drag racing thing and players getting arrested and all. And it's like, what happens off the field, Kirby Smart has no bearing on. He's not these kids' parents. He's not. He's not daddy. He is coach Kirby Smart. He coaches his football team. He teaches them how to play on the football team. He teaches them to be disciplined on the football field. That is his version of discipline. Go out there, perform the right set of moves. Don't get a flag, don't get a penalty, don't be a jerk to the other teammates, don't commit battery on the football field. That's his job. not
Right.
to prevent it on, off the field, or to prevent people that he can't have eyes on him all the time. He's not daddy. He's not. That's
Well, I
not part
mean,
of
they're
football
grown,
culture.
and let's not forget that these are relatively grown like people. They're not, fully 100% developed adults because they're college students, but they are legally adults and they're legally and for the most part, responsible for what they do and everything, how they carry themselves. I mean, they're more or less they're responsible for holding themselves as adults at this point in their life. Their parents can't even control what they do. At this point, it's just okay, were they taught right? Are they in with the right friends? A lot of times it doesn't matter how good your parenting is. It's, your influence from your friends. And there's just a lot of things. At the end of the day, the point is that these kids are not so much kids. Their parents can't, control what they do now that they're in college and whatnot, and their life outside of home. Um, and much less Kirby Smart being their football coach. And this is for any program. A football coach is not a parent. Um, and even if they were like teens in high school or even younger kids in like lower programs, you know, uh, um, in terms of like younger phases. Uh, Even then, the coach has nothing to do with how those kids act,
Right.
in terms of off the football field. If it doesn't have anything to do with what they're doing on the football field, in the practice room, or on the practice field, in the weight room, in the film room, it has nothing to do with the
Yeah.
coach,
Maybe
it just
maybe
doesn't.
the University of Georgia itself, the whole university, and the culture around the university, maybe there's an issue with that or something.
If
But to
that's
just
your
pin
if
it,
that's your
and,
stance,
and
maybe
let's
that has
also
merit.
remember,
Yeah.
let's also remember this as well, that, like, yeah, like, it's a lot of football players, but if you look and you read up on a lot of the stuff of the football players doing these drag racing stuff, it's just a lot of students involved, period. Like, that's a bit of a scene. Drag
Right.
racing's a bit
Kind
of
of
a
a
scene at University of
technicality at
Georgia.
that point.
It's a technicality, and it just gets pinned so much on the football team because, as a football fan, that's what you're looking at, are football headlines, and so the
Well, I mean,
football
UGA
players are going to be the only
football
ones.
is, yeah, they get the most of the spotlight for the
So
program. So,
So, I just don't, but to say, and we keep bringing up UGA, but it's just because, as Georgia fans, we tend to stay up to scoop with everything in Georgia. And I know I talk to a lot of fans, I talk to a lot of haters, and it's always that there's constantly throughout the season been a culture problem. And once again, I knew this was going to happen, and it just goes to show, when it's time to buy in, Kirby Smart somehow manages to get that team to buy in. He still has control of that football culture, because that team that came out to play Texas was disciplined, and they played good football. Yeah, Carson Beck had a bad game, but when they needed, guess what? Things went wrong. That play got overturned or whatever, that pass interference, and instead of crumbling down and guess what Georgia did? They went out and cranked out an 89-yard drive to completely shift momentum back.
controlled what they can
They
control,
control what
and
they
they
could control,
didn't,
and they went, and then
you
you
know,
you listen to the people who talked after that game and all. um, Jalen Walker, oh my goodness, dude, had the game of his life. One of the greatest games I've ever seen in a very long time of any defensive player. You know what he says after the game? They talk to him, and he says, I had a good game, but there's a lot of things I could have done better. I'm like, what could you have done better? At 3 sacks, 8 tackles, 3 tackles for loss, a recovered fumble. I don't think you can really have a better game than that. But he said he could have. And that's what we're talking about. It's like, you hear that? There's no culture problem on that field. Jalen Walker, another player, or maybe even Jalen Walker, could go and get arrested off field. That would suck, obviously, for Georgia fans, but like, he could do that. But he's still saying what he's saying on the football field, what he thought he could have done on the football field. Jalen, if that happened to Jalen
right.
Walker, I'd be super surprised, because he seems like a really stout and prideful guy, and really down to earth. But anyways,
But
um,
besides, just the talk on Georgia, Georgia, as you said, is just Georgia's just the perfect example right now of the
yeah,
word culture being thrown around and misused, and people getting the wrong idea of what football culture is, and putting too much parenting role on a football
Yeah.
coach, i.e., Kirby Smart. Like, what are we
Yeah,
doing?
I don't like I never think that anything that happens off the field should
Like, what
have
is he supposed to do?
anything to
Ground them
do.
and take their keys from their car
Exactly.
away and send them to their room? Like, what? He's their
Like,
football coach.
you
What
know,
the only thing that matters is what happens on that field between themselves and their opponents, what happens in the locker rooms, what happens on the practice fields, weight room, film room, press conferences, interfacing with the media. That's it. That is the sum of what football culture is. And you know, once again, what these kids do outside of their football activities has
completely
nothing
out
to
of
do
the
with Kirby
coach's
Smart
control.
and the football culture. So
Completely
we'll
out of
just
the coach's control in general, even
right.
barring, not even talking about Georgia. Yeah, it's just in general. Like, and I guess we can shift maybe into our next expectation. And another issue with culture is the idea that it can be built and sustained within an extremely short amount of time. And the reason I'm bringing that up is because I wanted to shift over and talk about expectations of coaches and teams and start with Alabama. Expectations on Alabama and Kalen DeBoer. And I can go ahead and
Yeah.
say expectations for Kalen DeBoer are unbelievably ridiculously high. Expectations for a culture are ridiculously high. The fact that it seems that because people have been crying and whining about the way Kalen DeBoer's culture has
The
seemed at this
Crimson Cried.
college, exactly the
Trust
way that they
fund
think
fans,
the way that
spoiled
they
fan
think that
base.
this is just Kalen DeBoer should have come in here and was like, oh, culture, like Malachi Moore's kicking, he's throwing tantrums on the field and stuff, and it's like you there's no way you truly expected Kalen DeBoer to come in here and just have the culture like that. It's like, oh, well, Nick Saban would have done this. Nick Saban would have, yeah, well, Nick Saban was the coach for 20 years. It's like, yeah, the culture is going to be different. You have a different coach. Nick Saban was there for 20 years and he built a dynasty and he built one of the best college football cultures there was.
We're talking
But
about a first year coach
but we're
in
talking about a
DeBoer.
first year coach who's trying to say culture is sustained from the coaching staff. So as soon as the coaching staff is changed, the culture changes. And Kalen DeBoer has had 8 months or whenever he started, maybe 7 or 8 months with this team. You can't expect him to have a championship culture already built because culture is completely separate from recruiting class. Yeah, he picked up a damn good recruiting class from Nick Saban, but he is not Nick Saban. So he can't
Right.
just go in there and everything be the same, culture be the same. He has to rebuild it. And I think that's the thing is that, people talk about, oh, I hear the jokes about Malachi Moore being being Kalen DeBoer's coach or whatever. And it's like, yeah, he's throwing tantrums on the field. First of all, a lot of Alabama players in the past have thrown tantrums on the field, and I think that it's the rat poison, as Nick Saban would call it, is that these players think that they're better than they actually are, or whatever. They think that they
Yeah.
get upset.
That's
It's like,
that's always happened with
that's what
Bama.
Malachi Moore is. He bought in. He doesn't understand how he obviously is of the idea that we should just go in here and be the greatest team of all time. I came to Alabama because I wanted to be on the greatest team of all time. Well, sorry, Kalen DeBoer is the new head coach, and I think Kalen DeBoer is a fantastic head coach. I'm not. I want Kalen DeBoer to do well because I like Kalen DeBoer. I think he's a good coach, but I did not. You and me talked about it. I think first episode we did not. We knew Kalen DeBoer was not going to have some stellar, insane season. You're not going
Right.
to have it as a first year head coach. You
Especially
know
not with the kind of uh conference he's in now,
exactly the
the schedule
schedule.
he has now,
You
the
know,
pressure he has on him. First, he's
look,
not,
a 10-2,
he's
nine
not
and three.
picking up where
Yeah,
Saban left
yeah.
off
Look,
in his first year. He's
a
not.
10-2, 9-3 season with a first year head coach, or a 10-2, 9-3 season with a win over a top ranked Georgia. Um, as a first year head coach, I think that's the best you can ask for, right?
Yeah,
Like
for a
what
first year
like
head
what do you?
coach,
I
that's
mean, like, I get your Alabama fans and you're used to going to national championship, but that again, that's because of Nick Saban. Yeah, he brought him to his second year. Maybe Kalen DeBoer brings him to his second year. But the way it translates is, yeah, Nick Saban didn't have the recruiting class that Kalen DeBoer has, but Nick Saban went 7-5 his first year using the UL Monroe. I think it translates pretty well that you get a top 5 recruiting class, but your first year head coach goes 10-2, 9-3 with a top 10 win. Like that, I feel like that's pretty much
it's
a good
pretty
translation.
proportional.
It's pretty
Yeah,
proportional, I would say. I just and like him wearing t-shirts and quarter zips
why
or
are
whatever
we
on the
so
field and
worried
not
about
like, well,
that?
come on, like It's like, I guess it's like it's the okay, so there is something wrong with the culture, bro. What does that have to do with the culture? You know,
Let the man wear what he wants to
I
wear,
don't.
what he's
I think here's
comfortable
the
in.
thing:
He's
could there be a culture problem? Could it you know arise? Yeah, of course it could. Of course it could. But 8 months into Kalen DeBoer's tenure, and it's not looking all that great culture wise. You know, like come on. I mean,
he's not even done with his first season,
I know,
people.
and he's 8 games into the first season, and all of a sudden we're panicking and we're losing. Like, oh, Bama fans,
They
Bama's
lose
falling apart. I'm seeing YouTube
they
videos that
lose
call
2
Bama's falling
games,
apart.
right.
Like, you lose to Vanderbilt. Well, come to find out, looks like Vanderbilt's having a pretty damn good season. They're a good team.
Vanderbilt
They
just
just brought it
happens
to the
to
wire with
literally be a
Texas.
good team this year.
They happen to be a good team,
And
and
that's the
Alabama
thing,
just happened. That's the thing, is that if it would have only
oh,
been a loss to
Vanderbilt, the planets
Tennessee,
aligned for Vanderbilt,
exactly,
That's
the
just the
planets
thing.
aligned
Like,
for Vanderbilt.
oh,
And what
Bama
really hurt,
lost to Vanderbilt
that's what
for the
killed it.
first
That's
time
what
since 1984. Oh, it's like,
exactly.
well,
They're
yeah,
like, oh,
Vanderbilt's better than they've been in a long time, and they just happen to play in Alabama with a brand new coach. Like
it is, it is
they
It is literally, it is, what's the word I'm looking for? It's written in stone that a first year head coach is going to lose a game to an unexpected opponent. Kirby Smart lost to Vanderbilt his first season. Nick Saban lost to UL Monroe his first season. It's like Kalen DeBoer lost to Vanderbilt. And might I add, also, Kalen DeBoer has had good losses, close losses against good football teams, Tennessee and Vanderbilt. So what are we doing here? Kalen DeBoer is a
right.
good
Your only
coach.
other loss is against a top ranked Tennessee.
They're top 10, and they
Okay,
may
yeah, you
finish top
struggled with
10.
South Carolina, but South Carolina's a good
They're
team. They
also
got
a good
one of the,
team.
I think they have one of the best defenses out there. And I mean, at the end of the day, I don't really know what they expect. I mean, I know what they expect. I don't know why they expect that. They expect to be top four Alabama all over again this year, the same as Nick Saban had them there. They expect to steamroll everybody. That's not how this works. It's just not.
No, it's not, and we're trying to tell
Like,
you
calm
know,
down.
go into the playoffs with a first year head coach, even if it's just a top 12 playoff, it would be a good would be a good feat. Yeah, I know it's Alabama, but that's the thing. Exactly. So the expectation is, as a first year head coach, maybe you should make it to the playoffs or have a good 9-3 season because you picking up Nick Saban's Alabama. Yeah, but again, he's not Nick Saban. The culture is going to change. The culture is not going to be the same. You have to accept that. And Bama fans, you're probably not going to be winning national championships, 7 out of 14 years now. Probably not.
Right. I mean, no, he's not. He's not Nick Saban. Nobody probably ever will be. So
So it's like I think it's just
you get
something that
one Bear Bryant, one Nick Saban, and in
and
a
again,
lifetime and a
right,
generation. Like
right,
it's
exactly. The
okay.
last coach to do what Nick Saban did was Bear Bryant, and that was 80 years ago. So
It's a long
I
time ago.
I think it was 60s, right? Bear Bryant was 60s, or was he
Yeah,
70s?
it was back in
Maybe
the
he was
'60s to the
50s. He might be
'70s.
50s. It was one of the two.
It was somewhere in the '60s and '70s. But
But anyways, yeah. So the thing is like it's just the speed at which we think culture is failing. It's first year head coach. Yes, they're getting a lot of penalties. There's some tantrums on the field. I think that's expected as a college
it's
football fan.
frustration. They
I've
have a
watched college
brand new
football for
coaching
19
staff.
exactly. It's
Yeah.
frustration, you
They're
know.
not used to it's the
Listen,
same team that was coached by Nick Saban, the same team, same roster of players under Nick Saban that was going to the playoffs with natty hopes. They think they're hot, snot. They're going to get frustrated
right.
when
Like
things aren't going their way.
I think
That's
you're acting
just
like I think Malachi Moore's acting like a child, but I at least understand the frustration. I
right.
don't think it's necessarily garnered, but like it makes sense, right? Like I understand, like I get it. You went to Nick Saban's Alabama, and now you're with a first year head coach, and your team's not doing as well as it did last year or as you were expecting. But like again, I expected it. I didn't expect Kalen DeBoer to have. I think we predicted Tennessee to win, and I figured early on Tennessee was probably going to win. So I'm even surprised that Kalen DeBoer's Bama beat Georgia, and that's good. Like that's a good win that needs to be, come on, like it's just crazy to me that they can go out there and beat Georgia like they did, and then lose to Vanderbilt, and all of a sudden the culture is just falling apart. And it's not all Alabama fans. Obviously, I know plenty that have their level head and they have faith in Kalen DeBoer, but let's just have faith in him as a head coach and give them a chance and stop thinking that a team has fallen apart in 8 months.
Well,
Culture is
just
a long-standing,
right.
consistent thing. Let Kalen DeBoer build a culture first. A culture, a new culture has to be built. Let him build the new culture. If it's a bad culture, you'll figure that out in the next 2 or 3 seasons, and then we'll know. Okay, now it's time to panic. Now it's time to see about. Yeah, if Kalen DeBoer is going 7-5 in the next, averaging 7 wins, 6, 7 wins the next few seasons after this season, like yeah, then okay, maybe that's a bit of a problem. You shouldn't be doing that with
I
Alabama,
mean,
but let's let that
man,
happen.
just you got a new head coach. It's not Saban's Bama anymore. I mean, you're doing pretty well for having a first year head coach. Just give it time. Like, stop panicking every time something doesn't go your way. You know what I mean? Like, that's. I mean, I know you guys are used to winning. My co-host said 7 out of 14 natty attempts or whatever. Like, it's not going to be that way anymore. And I think they just have to come to that realization, calm down. Like, you had your run, and there's nobody saying you won't have another run. But for now, just settle down and just
Right,
let's see where it
dynasties
goes.
come and they go. Alabama has had 2 or 3 dynasties at this point, so it's not very uncommon for you guys to, for Alabama to get a dynasty coach.
Right.
I
Now
don't
let's
see
talk
it.
about the other
Yeah.
program. We were the dichotomy,
Oh
the
yeah.
opposite
So
end,
what
the
we
other
wanted
program in
what we
coach
wanted to then
expectation.
rotate into with this is the opposite expectation, is that okay, well, Alabama, people are panicking now. Well, let's go to Colorado, because now everybody is talking about how Dion is now just, he's
Prime
him.
Colorado.
Prime time, baby.
Prime time Colorado.
But and let me preface this, because it's always, there's no, it's either love or hate with people with Coach Prime. If you don't like, or if you have any kind of argument against him, you're a hater. I like Coach Prime. I've liked what he's done so far with Colorado, and I have a lot of faith, and I think he will turn this into a really good program. But he hasn't yet, and I know what people are saying. Oh yes, he has. They're 6-2. This is one season, brother. They went 4-8 last season. They're 6-2 now. They could still finish 6-6. Yeah, they're bowl eligible for the first time since 2016, which is good on Deion Sanders. But let's not forget what happened the last time they were bowl eligible. 10-win season. Then I think they had a 4 or 5 win season next season. I'm not saying that that's going to happen to Deion Sanders. I'm just saying it could happen. I just think we're so akin, and this kind of goes with the like culture. I think nowadays we're so akin to just want to immediately have an answer. We immediately want it to be that
Yeah.
way. We want, oh, he's 6-2. He's got a good season this season. He's turned the program around. Guys, football is a game of consistency and time. Let him get another, season, maybe even two, maybe even three of bowl eligibility, and then you can safely say he has turned this program around. You know, I didn't say Kirby Smart turned Georgia around, or at least like made them a much better program when he went to the national championship next season, because I knew there was a possibility that he could start going back to 10-2, nine and
Right.
three,
In his
eight and
second
four
season.
seasons. It's like there's time. You got to go. But
But
now
you have
after.
that's the thing. You have ebbs and flows, and consistency is key. Um, you know, Schedules are going to start getting a little more difficult now too, with the 12-team playoff, NIL transfer portals. So Colorado is in prime position, presumably, to pick up some of that, tailwind from those things, but we don't know that for sure yet. And that Colorado is still Colorado. Like, okay, yeah, they got top tier, maybe NFL players like here and there, like one or two on the team, but it's like that's not the whole team. That doesn't
Well, they got they,
define
they they got a lot of, I
where
think,
the
NFL
program
talent this
is.
time around, but it was a lot of transfers. That's the huge thing. A lot of transfers that Dion picked up because of the primetime thing. But it's like,
Right.
okay, let's see how Dion can consistently recruit in the future
Yeah,
and
you can't solely
consistently
rely on
utilize that.
transfers.
He needs to be able to recruit and use the transfer portal. And uh, granted, also Colorado's has had, you know much easier season this time around than last season as well.
Yeah.
So, and they still had
That's the one
struggle
thing that goes
games.
without saying, more or less, but
Still got beat up pretty bad by Nebraska, who then got absolutely ran
Nebraska.
by Indy. And it's like, you know, I I still think Colorado is a good team this season. You don't go 6-2 just being trash. I don't think they're upper echelon by any means because of their schedule and because
And
of the
I
losses they
don't,
have.
and I hate to say it, I don't think they're top 25, which they have a rank in the top 25 right now. I don't believe that. Um, you know, but and we'll get into that in our next
Yeah,
topic coming up.
but
But
I just think
yeah,
I
let's
just
give it some
dislike it.
time. But
Right.
it's like you said, it's now. You know, it's one extreme to another. Like we have such a bipolar society,
Yeah.
bipolar culture, and civilization. In the West,
Yeah. If
particularly
it's one
nowadays,
bad
like we
season,
touched on that
time to
profound
panic.
reality.
If it's one bad season, time to
One
panic.
good season, they're the
One good
new.
season. Now, oh, it's a completely new program. Okay,
They're it.
they went like 9-3 or 10-2 with a bowl win in 2016, and then they went right back to being terrible. So let's just,
Ebbs and
it's like
flows. It's the
and oh,
consistency of how you
we
ride the
use last
wave.
season as an example too. The people talk about 4-8. Oh, well, that's a 4 times increase or whatever. It was better than last season. Yeah, they went 1-11. It's not that hard to do better than that. 4-8 though
Right.
is no
Well,
different
where's the
than the.
bar, dude?
It's like you
If that's the
there have
bar,
you
that's
have
not
if
turning
you're talking
Colorado
about
around,
with
you know?
you're if you're talking about turning around a
The bar
program
has
means
to be raised.
if you're turning around a program, well, no, if you're turning around a program, you have to compare it to how the program has been over time, because how you can play over time now
Right, the bar from that
beyond them.
reference has to
If well,
increase,
they were they were talking about that 1-11 season. Okay, well, they just went 5-7 the season before that, or no, they went 4-8, and then they went 5-7 before that season. So it's 5-7, 4-8, 1-11, and then 4-8. You average that all out, you haven't done much better that than the 4-8 season. Like you've maybe, if you do the average, maybe 0.5, I think, more wins. Like, so it wasn't turned around. They're like, oh, he turned the program around.
which
He's
doesn't mean
it's
anything.
3 more wins. It's like, yeah, but okay, Northwestern went 1-11 one season and then went 10-2 or 9-3 the next season. And then they're back to what, 3-4 this season. Like, it's consistency,
So
man.
are
If
we saying Northwestern is turned around,
Yeah, what did we say? They were turned
The
around
bar is
because they went
raised for
10.
them?
Arizona 2-10, then 10-2. Are they turned around? No, they went 3. They're terrible this season. It's all about consistency. Let's see if I will start to say, okay, yeah, it looks like he might be turning it around if they have another bowl eligible season next season. But you're not going to catch me ever be like, yeah, he's turned the program. He hasn't yet. He is turning it around. Let's see if he can turn, if it will be turned around. Let's see if he has turned it around.
Right.
So
And that's the
what
big
happened to
word.
the journey? Where's the journey? Like their
Yeah.
football is not a 6 month, 7 month journey. It was a one season journey.
Man, we live in a day and age of short attention spans and instant gratification, dude. This is just a
I
consequence of
mean,
that,
yeah,
you
Kirby
know.
Smart has
The
turned
big
Georgia into a
look, word
powerhouse,
of the
but
day.
he's been here 9 seasons.
How
Word of the
about
day,
this? How
what?
about this? Word of the day. Uh word of the day, kids. Consistency.
Consistency.
It's the word of the
Very,
day. It's very
very
important.
important in
That's
football
numero uno in football, man. That's consistency, you know.
because
Very important.
if you go 10-2 this season and then he goes back to a 5-7 season, then it's right. Then we're right back to questioning. Oh, maybe he didn't turn it around. Well, you shouldn't have been
Ebbs and
assuming he had
flows,
turned it
man.
around. You know,
It's how you
it's like
ride the
my
wave.
my thought process is maybe he's turning it around. Maybe. So I'm not going to be surprised if he goes 5-7 next season because it's possible, you know?
Right. So far, the bar hasn't really changed for them, and that's kind of what gauges the bar, the standard changing, raising relative to what it was
Yeah.
before. That's the definitive
What
aspect of turning a
turning this
program
right
around.
now, you were 4 or 5 wins program. You were cusp. Colorado was cusp of bowl eligibility for 8, 9 years, 4 to 5 wins. That's right on the cusp of bowl eligibility. They did have that 1-11 season, which was rough, but you like you haven't been bowl eligible. That's something you haven't done in 8 years. So if you can consistently, so if the next 3, 4 years you can be bowl eligible, then it's like, oh well, you weren't
Right.
bowl eligible consistently. Now you are bowl eligible consistently.
Let's
So
start
now,
there. Baby steps. Let's start
right,
there. Let's see better recruiting classes consistently, and let's see more bowl eligibility first and foremost,
right,
and winning seasons from Colorado. Then we can start. We see that
right,
next 2 seasons, three for sure. We're saying, okay, looks like it's turning around.
right.
But I guess
So
we should
yeah,
move
we'll
on to our
move
next
on
topic.
to our next topic, which is
This is
the AP.
technically a turnover on clowns segment. We're technically doing
Yeah,
state of the sport and
technically.
turnover on
We
clowns in
always
this
do
one.
our top 15, but we're kind of mixing it
Uh,
in because I am very unhappy with the AP poll this week.
and
So
that is our clown for today. Turnover on clowns, folks. Actually, since I did the other thing, let me
the
we're so
AP.
we're professional brothers. This is hold on. Okay. Turnover on clowns. Do we really need some like sound effects and stuff?
Yeah, no, this is
Um
great.
so this is one of our little like segments that we kind of wanted to like brand and be more regular, but this is I think the second one we've done. But we're going to talk about the AP, the Associated Press college football poll. And we've kind of snuck in little hits on them here and there because the AP, speaking of consistency, the AP is just consistently like wrong about how good teams are, season to season, depending on what the team like, because they focus so much on the bare bones numerical win loss record. And we've talked about that before and how we rank our teams in terms of okay, there's more to it. Quality of opponent, strength of schedule, what your roster looks like, the players you have, the talent.
Yep.
You know, there's so much more to it.
The
Um, yeah.
the top the top 5 starting out not too terrible,
Well, that's
you
the thing.
know.
Like the top five, maybe even top 10, like that's pretty straightforward
I
for like most
uh,
anybody can gauge
except for
that.
Indiana. In what world does Iowa State belong above Indiana?
Yeah.
In
I guess that's
what
the first step
world?
we'll step on.
Iowa State, they are both undefeated. Indiana has one more win. Indiana, yeah, they haven't played anybody. Neither has Iowa State. Iowa State hasn't played anybody. Like I,
The
I don't understand.
difference, the
The difference
difference
is that
is
Iowa
the
State's
margin of victory.
all of their games have been close.
Indiana has
Indiana
mollywalked everybody
has
they've
just
played.
absolutely ran the table with everybody they've played. Their quarterback's play has been incredible. They just went and got a super good win with a backup quarterback. So how? Why? I don't think Iowa State really probably even belongs in the top 15.
So Indiana almost has a 10-point higher average margin of victory against opponents, and they've pretty much played comparable opponents. And in my opinion, Iowa
Iowa
State
State's
maybe
best win is a 1 point win over Iowa.
1 point win against Iowa, who is not a bad team, but they're basically just your average
They've
team.
had their best season they've
You
had so
know,
far in a while, but like they're
they're an
just
average team
average.
this
They're an
year.
average team.
1 point win. And I know it's a rivalry and the dynamic of that. They played at Iowa. It's a rivalry game. There's a dynamic to that, but you can't make claim to being top 10 and only beat, an average rival by 1 point,
Well, the point is that being your best win though
that being your
is the
best win.
problem.
Indiana and Nebraska isn't all that special,
But
but
the win looks a lot
Nebraska,
better now.
Nebraska is somewhat the same as Iowa. Iowa arguably has a better defense, maybe, but Nebraska
I
and
think
Iowa,
Nebraska's better.
and that's arguable. But they're if nothing else, they got the same record in the same conference. I mean, Iowa's 3-2 in the Big Ten.
Because you can
Nebraska's
because
2-3.
you can do comparable. I mean, I know we talk about like
But Indiana still beat them by
comparing
like
games.
almost 50
Oh, it was
points.
no,
So like,
it was 56-7. They beat them
yeah,
56-7.
49-point differential.
They beat them 56-7, and then they go and they play Ohio State, and I believe in Columbus. It was in Columbus. They
Yes.
went and played Ohio State and kept it a 4-point game, 21-17. Iowa, Iowa State's best win. Iowa went and got beat by Ohio State 35-7. So if you're going to
if
do,
we're using that
sometimes you gotta,
transitive argument.
kind of sometimes we don't really have a lot to go off of between the two teams other than wins. So you kind of have to then, okay, well, how is a win better than another win? Well, it's because you got to compare competition. Well, so
Right,
far,
quality of
Nebraska
opponents.
has looked better than Iowa. They're same record, but through similar opponents, Nebraska has played much better.
I mean,
So,
I think on paper and the eye test, Indiana is
oh, 100% I
way
agree.
better than Iowa State. They're just up there. I don't even think Iowa State's the
We
top.
always talk,
I
everybody
don't want to
talks
give
about,
away too much because we're going to get into that in a
yeah,
little bit on the Talk-Ons top 15. But Iowa State is, mark my words, that is not a top 10 program.
I
They
don't,
are not a top 10
I don't
team.
think
They're
they're great
not.
because again, Indiana doesn't have, like you said, doesn't have the greatest wins in the world, but they have done what they're supposed to with these wins that we've talked about. It's like that's what we talked about with Texas, comparing Texas to Georgia. It's like, well,
And
why was Texas above
Miami is an
Georgia?
important thing to talk about too
Yeah, well, we'll
because
talk about, but
right. That
which
but we'll
we
just
are
put it
going
out
to piss
there.
some people off with our top 15 this
Well,
time
look, we'll
around.
just put it out there. We'll say this. Okay, see, the weak schedule argument, it has merit, but obviously when programs make these schedules, the prior season, they can't predict who's going to be who, before the season. So it's like they don't necessarily know who's going to be bad and who's going to be good, how weak their schedule is going to be. I mean, unless they're scheduling a bunch of like FCS teams or like group of 5 teams. But here's the thing. The mark I have one criterion, and I think my co-host agrees. There is one criterion that kind of justifies like going around that weak schedule aspect. Okay, you have a weak schedule. All right, whatever. You can't always help that. But if you are who you say you are, if you are one of the best teams in the country, you are mollywhopping that weak schedule. You are dominating that weak schedule. You're not winning by two,
Right.
three, four, one score against mid opponents, Miami,
Yeah.
um, Iowa State. If you really are a top 10, top program, weak schedule or not, okay, we'll get around that weak schedule, but you need to be mollywhopping these teams. If you're really that good, considering how weak your schedule is, you should be beating these teams like Indiana's been beating them, like Ohio State's been beating them. That's the thing.
Uh,
Like, okay, yeah, weak schedules, but
and that's the thing about the Nebraska game for Indiana. That like they went beyond expectations with that. I didn't expect them to mollywop Nebraska. I thought
yeah,
that was going to be a
I did
relatively
not
close game.
expect that. What we
56 to
saw,
7 is insane. I mean, they just beat the ever living crap out of
yeah,
Nebraska. And Nebraska has been an okay, like they've been a solid team. So, yeah, and I'm going to be real with you. Like, I only see other top 10 teams being the ones to beat Nebraska that bad, minus Ohio State. Granted, I
right?
think, we talk about sentiment. I think maybe Nebraska had a
The
lot more to
mind
prove
game,
now
yeah,
after losing to Indiana
because
like
it
they
it
did.
was they wanted to bounce back
But I
against
think what
Ohio
it
State.
was
Ohio
is
State
that
overlooked them,
Nebraska didn't expect Indiana to be as good of a team as they are, and Indiana proved that you should have Googled them because they win.
right? Should have googled them.
Should have
They
Googled
win.
Kurt. Should have Googled Signetti himself.
He tried to tell you.
He tried to tell
But
you.
and that's an important thing that we'll establish and we'll keep that moving forward is that, you know, because strength of schedule obviously is super important. Quality of opponents is a super important factor. And once again, these teams programs can't always help how weak or strong their schedule will be. But one more time to just drive the point home, if you have a weak schedule and you are supposed to be an elite team or a top contender, you need to be obliterating this weak schedule. You can't be struggling
Yeah.
with a weak schedule and still make claim to being a top team. That's not how it works. So that if you don't meet that one criteria, then we're going to hold the weak schedule against you. That's just going to be held against you
Mhm.
because it's telltale. At the end of the day, it just is what it is.
And
How
I
about
think
what they did to old Dandy Vandy, by the
yep,
way?
that's exactly why my name is what it is because
Yeah, we look like we're behind like 2 or 3
yeah, I
weeks of
know we
reaction
look like
because of
we're
how it
comparing.
just
It's like, oh, Crimson
yeah,
Cry, Danny Vanny, and it's like, oh, well, it just kind of happened that way because
we
of the
didn't plan these
topics.
names out,
I'm
so it
Dandy
just
Vandy
happened,
today
yeah,
because I
ironically.
am trying to spread awareness for the Vanderbilt Commodores. because they deserve recognition and they deserve the love because they have played great football this season in a very difficult conference. They've gotten a good win against Alabama, and they finally got put in the AP. And I think they deserve to be in the top 25. I really think they do, especially if you're going to put Washington State or you're going to put who else?
Yeah, and that's
Pittsburgh. Or you're
another
going to
thing.
put
Like
like those teams.
AP,
Why are you know?
what were you thinking when you put Washington State in the top 25? 7-1? Who cares?
And
Have you
then
seen that record?
we'll talk about Missouri, which I think was the worst decision the AP's made all season, and that's going to be kind of compared to Vanderbilt. How
Right,
do you put
jumping back into
Vanderbilt?
them.
How do you put Vanderbilt at 25, and then they go into a game as an 18.5 point underdog and lose by 3 points? They battled and they
Against a
won.
top
They
5
battled
team
and they lost,
or
but they
top
lost
6.
way be they lost well below expectation. They were expected to get, beat up pretty
They
handily by
held
Texas,
their own
and they
against
held their ground. They
Texas.
kept that a game they never let it get away from them the whole game. And honestly, Vanderbilt killed themselves with turnovers too. There's no telling what Vanderbilt could have done had they just kept hold of the ball as well. Give it to
So,
Texas. Texas played a good game, and I think that's a good win for Texas. I really
right,
do.
because
About
Vandy's a tough opponent
because
this year. People
Vandy's a tough
downplaying
opponent,
Vandy. They don't
and you
get it.
just got
They
off of
don't
a
get it.
really rough loss to Georgia, and then you went in there into Nashville, which has been a pretty karma-ridden place this season.
Yeah.
So
Cursed,
um,
if nothing
it's
else.
been cursed. But
It's
Vanderbilt,
like
I
the
think, is a
Jordan Hare of 2024.
I really think Vanderbilt's a tough place to play right now. I think they're a tough team to beat. I think they belong in the top 25, even as a three-loss team, because all three of their losses, well, other than Missouri, and I get it, they didn't want to put Missouri or Vanderbilt above Missouri
Because
because
of the
Missouri
head to
beat them.
head.
But
But
Vanderbilt has
consistency, word of the
Vanderbilt
day.
has two. I believe Vanderbilt has a ranked win against, and at the time it was a number one team in the country ranked win. They have a ranked win, and then the only other top 10 team they've played, they kept it within a field goal. Missouri has lost the last two games
By a big
against ranked
margin.
opponents. I think
Oh,
75 to 10.
speaking of head
75
to
to
head,
10.
right? And speaking of head to head on that, uh, so Alabama, what did they just do to Missouri? You know, the same Alabama team that Vanderbilt beat. And I mean, I guess like direct head to head, they're going to put more
That's what I'm
weight
saying.
on
You
that.
can't use you can't use direct head to head either because it's like you can't use head to head because I mean technically
But
if like
the better team, like the better Missouri is not the better team. I think it's fair to say. Like Missouri pulled out a close win against Vanderbilt, but in Como, you put that Missouri team in Nashville,
oh,
Vanderbilt wins that
I mean,
game.
I think Vanderbilt wins it handily in
Vanderbilt's a better
Nashville.
team. I don't see how Vanderbilt can lose, like you said, be an 18-point underdog, uh, and lose to number 6 Texas by only 3 points
Yeah.
as the number 25 team, and Missouri lose to number 14 Alabama by
Yeah.
34
There's
to
there
0.
which is a
How do
team that
you
Vanderbilt
drop
beat.
Vandy from 25 and put Missouri at
Well, I
25?
think the
How do
the
you
AP
punish Vanderbilt, a 25 ranked team, for losing to number 6 by 3 points? Come
the
on.
AP apparently has this mentality that if you lose, you got to drop, which I disagree because I think it's all based on expectation of who
Right.
you play. Vanderbilt played beyond expectation. So if you play beyond expectation, you deserve to at least keep your place because
Right.
no, I didn't think I honestly because I thought Texas was going to go in there with a chip on their shoulder and absolutely like really put it to Vanderbilt, but
Yeah.
I was wrong because Vanderbilt literally had proved to me this weekend that they're
And you
just
know
a good
what?
team. They're just a
And
good
that's a
team.
good point. They're a good team. And that's a good point. What you just touched on earlier is like if when they were ranked 25, the expectation of them being ranked 25 was to lose by almost 20 points, and they keep it close and only lose by 3, what kind of logic is it
How
to
can you
drop
be a number?
them?
Yeah, how can you be ranked? How can you be number 25
How does that
and
work?
keep it close against the top five team, and then you drop? It just doesn't
That
make any sense to me.
that expectation was based on their ranking and where they stood, and they played above that expectation, but they dropped because, as we've talked about before,
Can't
and this
well
is why
because
we're
everybody else is two loss or one loss. Can't have a three
right, and
loss
that's
team
why
in the
we're
top
talking
25.
about it today is The AP puts way too much weight on that number and the numbers in the W and the L fields because you know like you said, they treat it as if, oh, a loss automatically means you have to drop, you know, or a win automatically means you have to raise. And who did you win against? Pittsburgh. Who did
You
you
know,
win against? Washington State.
eh,
What are we? I don't care if you're undefeated. Come
it's
on.
tough. People don't think they, I don't know. It's like it's
Liberty was undefeated for a
the
while,
thing is Vanderbilt has a
Are
tough
we
game
putting them
against
in the
Ball
top
State.
25, 15?
They have a tough game against Ball State, and they have a loss to Georgia State, and that really hurts Vanderbilt, I think. But the thing is I just think that like
I still
being
think Vanderbilt's a better team than Missouri. I think most people would
if you're
agree.
gonna include if you're gonna include you know honestly if yeah exactly if the AP is going to be this high on Missouri apparently God they must have some stock in Missouri or something.
Because
Why not
every
have
decent
Vanderbilt
team,
higher?
right? Every like good team Missouri's played against, they've either struggled or gotten the crap beat out of them. And Washington State,
I'm sorry.
Vanderbilt would run Washington State. They would run them.
I
Come on
agree. I think
now,
Vanderbilt
they
would
would
beat
run
up on
Washington State.
Washington State. I
But we got
really
them
do.
ranked at
I
22.
think Vanderbilt would beat up on Pittsburgh.
Maybe I think it'd be a good game, and Vanderbilt might take the case in that one. But you know, I know I was crapping on Pittsburgh earlier because of like
I
it's
think
I don't I
Vanderbilt
think
beats.
Pittsburgh's a
Look,
good team,
I'm gonna be real
but
with you.
like this automatic, oh
Yeah,
well, just because they're undefeated, just because they won, or just because they lost, okay, now we got to shift them up, we got to shift them down, knock
yeah.
them
It's
out.
decided that if
It's
you
just
lose, you got to
broken
drop. That's
numeric.
not how that
It's
works.
just
I don't think that's how it should work.
it's
It's all about
absolute on the
expectation. You
numbers.
know.
Like the numbers are not absolute. It's not the be all end all on win loss records. Did we forget about strength of
This
records,
is the
strength of
beauty
schedules,
of
quality of opponents?
visualizing and rating teams based on their
Right.
performance,
Watch the
because like
film,
I'm saying, when we put
etc.
them in the top 25, they did lose. You can't just drop them because they lost. Because it's like, okay, well, even if they lost, I think losing 27 to 24 to,
To a top 10
Tech,
team.
to Texas or whatever is honestly a better game overall than, Miami barely and also being bailed out in a win over California. Like, I really
Well,
think that's
hey,
the
how
truth.
about this? Let's touch on a dichotomy here to further scrutinize the AP's ranking logic. So the same kind of loss, the same exact kind of loss, a 3-point loss to a top 10 team that got Vandy dropped out the top 25 is the same kind of loss that is the only reason Boise State is ranked where they are. Think about
Truth.
that. Because if it was not for their very close game against top ranked Oregon, they wouldn't be ranked where they are. No, they
Exactly.
just wouldn't. But Vandy loses the same kind of loss to the same caliber of opponent and they get dropped out. When I think Vanderbilt probably beat Boise State. Like, come on, what are we doing? Think about this, guys. Like, I
I
don't know,
just
man. I'm not saying Boise State is
I
not a
think
good
Boise
team.
State or I think Vanderbilt beats Colorado. I think and so now we have
I think Boise
Colorado in the
State is
top
the best
25.
group of five team, but we're still talking about the difference between group of five and power conference teams. I hate to sound biased to the power conferences, but the reality is it's written, um, it's obvious. So if the same logic of a loss can make you rank Boise State above LSU, uh, and Ole Miss, um,
Then
then
why can't Vandy why
what?
can't
How
they
does
get the
Vandy get
flowers here?
dropped out from the
I
same
just
kind of loss? And guess what? Boise State doesn't have a win against a top ranked team like Bama. Vanderbilt does. So like where do we draw the line on the critical logic of okay, they got this win loss record, but where do we start to talk about quality of opponents, Because the
I think
AP
it's just
doesn't
that
hinge
loss.
on
It's
that
that
enough.
it's
They
that
just
loss to
don't.
Georgia State is probably what really killed Vanderbilt, but that was early in the season, and sometimes and Clark Lee's team just needed to find their footing. But I think we should probably move on and go ahead and say now that we've crapped on the AP enough, we should at
Yeah.
least pull up go ahead and get our top 15, run through it real quick so we can get out of here in this hour.
Yeah,
So
so we want to keep we've been trying to get better at this timing thing. So now, since we've crapped on the AP, I guess enough. I mean, I could go
I
all
think we've
day,
kind
but
of also given points for teams, and now it'll make a lot more sense with less
right.
explanation of our
So
top
now,
15.
so the AP is wrong, and the talk-ons is
Are
objectively right.
right.
We are professionals. We're objectively right. So we're about to show the today's updated ranks of the official talk-ons top 15. Um, so let me go ahead and present that. All right.
I'm
So here we go.
waiting.
This is your official week 10 talk-ons top 15. Um, go away, Siri. I didn't mean to be mean to her. Okay, so obviously I feel like the top 5 fills out pretty obviously. Now, Penn State being below Ohio State, um, I don't think Ohio State losing by 1 point to the number 1 ranked
Yeah,
team on the
agree.
number 1 ranked team's home field justifies putting Penn State above Ohio State. I am not 100% believer in Penn State right now.
But
So,
guess what? The
I
reason
think
that we're
Ohio
just
State's
going to leave
better,
the reason we're just going to leave it this way as well is because
but they
play
play this
this
weekend.
weekend. So
So that this will be resolved. As of now, I think Ohio State's the better team. Penn State's see the thing is Penn State has more to prove right now than Ohio State. So that's
agreed.
why I'm putting Ohio State above Penn State because until they prove that they're better than Ohio State, I'm not ranking them above
If
Ohio
you can
State.
if you can keep it
So
within 1 point of the number one team in the nation currently, if you look at that in like a logical sense of like let's say we think Oregon is the best team in the country and we think they are national championship worthy. It's like, well, if Ohio State can keep it within 1 point, they're national championship worthy
I
too.
mean, they if,
Penn
like
State
toss
has
up if they
nothing
play in
shown,
Columbia,
right?
So
Like
Penn State hasn't
Columbia,
shown anything.
they play all the way in Columbia.
Columbia, oh, Columbus. Sorry, guys.
But
Um,
Penn State,
But
it just
also, we talk about the weak schedules. Ohio State's played a weak schedule otherwise than their, good loss, which it is a good loss. But hey, Ohio State has handled teams besides Nebraska. They've had, which was a team coming off of a really bad loss that, there was the look ahead for Ohio State and the bounce back for Nebraska. But other than that, like Ohio State has creamed every other team they've played on their weak schedule, so they still meet that criterion we talked about earlier of justifying a
yeah.
weak
The
schedule.
AP seems to
So
be high on Iowa State. Well, Ohio State beat their best win by like 4 times what they
right,
did. So now,
and
no, actually, no, they did 1 point. They won 28 times more if you do the actual math there.
and Penn State, um, their schedule is just as weak. Outside of Ohio State's game against Oregon, Penn State's schedule is just as weak. I mean, I know they had a ranked win against Illinois. Do I think going back to the AP, do I think Illinois is a top 25 team? I don't really think so. And even then,
Well,
Penn
let's take a
State,
look at the
that still wasn't a necessarily dominant performance by Penn State at
I,
home. Like the score doesn't
yeah.
tell the whole story, but
It doesn't tell the whole story, but it also like you look at it, it's like, okay, well, if you want to use discrepancy in transitive property, like Oregon, Ohio State barely beat or barely lost Oregon by 1 point. And then Oregon goes and beats a team that Penn State didn't do all the great. Oregon absolutely just manhandled Illinois. Like Illinois didn't know who they were on that field against Oregon. And
right.
it's
So if
like,
we're basically saying Oregon and Ohio State are just as good as one another toss up in a game, then it would seem from that, it would be justified to just estimate that Ohio State's just still better. Like Penn State hasn't proved
yeah.
anything yet, and even like I said, Penn State has on the weak schedule conversation, Penn State has not blown out and dominated their weak schedule. They just haven't. I
But
think their biggest margin of victory was against West Virginia.
so
Who is average team, but
but and we'll go and I think I don't know how much I believe Penn State's better than Texas, but I think we want to try and mix it in a little bit with who's better and like ranking wise because of, but the thing is that my logic is like for Penn State and Texas is that Penn State, they haven't played a great team, but they've got some ranked wins, and both Penn State and Texas have pretty lackluster, crappy schedules. Let's be
And
real.
Tech, well, I'll
But
say this:
they both play
Penn State hasn't had the opportunity to win or lose to a great
right. As
team.
I'm saying, Texas
Texas
has,
lost; they got
and
dominated by Georgia. Georgia's offense is on firing on its cylinders in that game. Texas probably gets blown out. Uh, Texas got dominated, and I think it's not fair to keep Texas above Penn State considering their performance
yeah,
at
because
home
Penn
against
State at least
Georgia.
hasn't been
So
dominated by a team yet. Like
we
Penn
we
State's
know
handled
where
business.
Texas stands. We don't for
Right,
sure know where Penn State
right.
stands. So it's not fair to do too much injustice to Penn State
So,
yet. But
and
we'll
then
find out this weekend. So
Tennessee getting good wins, consistently playing well. They beat Alabama, and then Alabama went and blew Missouri out 34-0. So I think that's still a good win.
Alabama's still
Um,
a damn
they're
good
still a
win.
good team. I mean, they're a good team,
That's a
still a
good
good
team.
win. I mean, as you see, we have them at number 12. Um, Indiana and Notre Dame, we had to put Indiana in top 10. I'm sorry. They are just absolutely blowing by teams. And after that Nebraska win and then how Nebraska played against Ohio State, I think it's only fair that you put Indiana this high. And I just think I think that win over Nebraska is better than anything. I think Nebraska is a better team than Navy. I really do. So
I'd probably say so.
Notre Dame, nothing. Nothing. The only good win is the A&M win, and we were nice enough to put them above Notre or A&M because of that. But it was first game of the season. I think they replay. I think A&M beats Notre Dame pretty
Yeah, we can
handily.
make an argument for Texas
But
A&M being better at this point in the season than Notre Dame. But Indiana, as we said before, talking about the AP uh, conversation, the way they're doing Indiana doesn't make any sense. Indiana's a top 10 team.
yeah,
There's no shot you put Iowa State in the top 10 and you leave Indiana out.
yeah. I can't believe they're not pushing for Indiana to be top 10 because once Ohio State, and of course, I guess the playoff rankings will probably. Well, no, I guess maybe I don't know how that works. I feel like that's something they'd have to wait till the very end. Anyways, but shouldn't we have Indiana as high as possible so then the Ohio State and Indiana game is even crazier? But anyways, I put Notre Dame where they're at because I don't even think they should be number 8. But I it's not really fair to put them below other teams that we have here because they've at least done they've handled business at least. So and they
How about we
they have an
say
upset
this
loss, but I it is
for
so
Notre
hard to
Dame?
put trust in Notre Dame, and we've talked about this before. It's so hard to put trust in Notre Dame because they don't have conference. They're not in a conference, and every single time they are hyped and rated high, they always get absolutely destroyed by good teams. And I just
And I
don't think
think
Navy's all that great. So
well, I'll say this. I think Notre Dame, because like I said, the same with Penn State, because we don't know for sure. We can't say for sure either way. That's kind of when you do have because Notre Dame has okay, they had an upset loss to get against Northern Illinois. Upsets happen, but Notre Dame has been dominating most of their week competition, like absolutely clapping them. So once again, with that criterion being met for the week schedule argument, and also us not knowing for sure against great opponents either which way, we just have to kind of go by their record and kind of give them the benefit of the doubt and put them above put them at number 8. And honestly, I think between
I
number
wasn't
8,
gonna.
I think numbers 8 through 12, I think all of those teams are pretty close, pretty
Yeah, I
comparable.
think it could be a pretty
I think it could be
toss
a
up.
toss
Yeah.
up between 8 through 12, all of these teams, honestly.
Um,
So
I say okay. So A&M, the argument for that is that the reason they're only reason they're even above Clemson at this point because I think we had Clemson at 9. Well, A&M got a really good looking win against LSU.
right.
I still think LSU is a good team even
They
after that
beat the
win. I think
crap
they
out of
just
Missouri, and then they went on to beat LSU, which is a top ranked team, and I believe they should be.
Clemson. Now here's the crazy thing: Clemson above Miami. Why? Well, I think Clemson's the better team. I think their defense is better. I don't think their offense is better. I mean, Miami technically has the best offense in the country statistic wise. They haven't played a defense worth even throwing a stick at. So, but I just think Clemson will be the better coach team. And
That's another thing. Yeah.
I think you put Cam Ward against that Clemson defense. I think now Clemson, I think, has some depth issues because they always seem to really let teams score a lot, even the no-name teams. Like they'll blow them out the first three quarters, and that fourth quarter gets really shaky for them. So maybe there's a little bit of a depth issue with Clemson. But I think that I still think Miami loses to Clemson, and I actually think Clemson will probably end up being in the playoff. But we'll get to a prediction hopefully next week for that. But Miami, I just don't have a lot of faith in their defense whatsoever. And about really all they got going for them is Cam Ward and Restrepo, and they've been bailed out in multiple games. So that
Look, we
California
talked
game
about
was
it before.
atrocious. It just
We talked about it before, and earlier the weak schedule argument. Miami does not meet that criterion that we mentioned for making a justification for being a top team with a weak schedule because they have struggled and had nothing but close wins against average and below average opponents. Miami has consistently struggled against their weak schedule, other than their first two games, Florida and South Florida, which Florida was a different team, I believe, in week one, first of all. And South Florida is one of the worst teams in group of five this year. So, it's like uh, beyond that, and that's another thing that we try to keep in mind is like how things play out in the here and now. Remember, football is an evolving game. Week to week, things change, teams change. Like with A&M, for example, and how we kind of think A&M's better than Notre Dame at this point, but we'll give Notre Dame the benefit of the doubt. You know, teams change, and consistency is important. And the performance moving forward. And Miami has consistently just had close games with
yeah,
mid competition. And Clemson, their schedule is pretty comparable, but Clemson, I think, has beaten their weaker schedule more convincingly. And once again, another thing we take into account when we make our rankings is who has the better team, like who has the better roster and coach. I think Clemson just has a better overall team and a better coach than
definitely a
Miami.
better
You
coach.
got Dabo. Don't sleep on Dabo. Don't sleep on that Clemson roster. And with that all being said, as well, um, and I'll kind of bring Tennessee back into this because I know a lot of people are thinking in their mind, like, oh, Tennessee lost to Arkansas. They had a close game with Florida. Well, upsets happen. Arkansas is a good team. Florida is a better team now than they were early in the season. And it's also a rivalry game. Like the mental edge
Oh yeah,
matters. But also, this is another. I was leading into another criteria we use for our top 15 and when we do our rankings. At the end of the day, part of the like placements of the rankings is asking yourself, would this team beat this team? Which team between this one, when placing where they're at, would beat this one? And I think Tennessee would most likely win against the all of the teams below them in this list. And I think Clemson would beat Miami if they played right now. I just think Clemson's a better
yeah,
team. So
yeah, and
we try to make it as like the combination of quantitative but also like realistic qualitative like the
yeah.
reality of things. We try to factor in everything we can when we make these rankings. Granted, like we said, Penn State and Notre Dame, with that being said, both of those teams were giving the benefit of the doubt. Um, and
Now with
Boise State, which we'll
Alabama,
touch on in a second. But
with Alabama being ranked 12, they're below Miami. I think that this kind of comes down to a game of a shootout. I think Miami and Alabama would be a shootout, and I
yeah,
think when you look at a
two
shootout,
bad defenses and two explosive
when you
offenses.
when
Yeah,
you look at a shootout in this case, it's usually who's gonna obviously it's who can produce more, and therefore a lot of times who has the better quarterback is the biggest thing. And I
yeah.
100% think that Miami has the better quarterback. I've never been high on Jalen Milroe. I've made that very vocal throughout the show. I do not think he is a great quarterback, and he has struggled a good bit this season. If it wasn't for Georgia making him look like Jesus, then
I think
he
yeah,
would
in the
not
first quarter of
be
that
high
game
right now.
anyway. I
So
think he's overrated, and I agree. I think in a shootout, obviously the consistency of the offense matters a lot. The quality and level of play from the leader of the offense being the quarterback, the talent of that quarterback, and game management of the quarterback in a shootout is really what's going to make the difference. You know, other than whose defense makes that critical
Right.
one stop that gives that lead at the end. Which Alabama kind of makes an argument because Miami's defense, they both have bad defense, but I still think Alabama's got a better defense than Miami. So I think it could go
Yeah,
either
but
way with that being said,
I think that Miami's
But
offense
you
is
think
just going to be
Cam
much
Ward, you
better. I
think their
just think
offense
that
is more potent
yeah,
than
yeah,
Alabama's,
and
so they get the edge at the end.
because Jalen Milroe has
I guess
shown
I'd agree. Yeah.
this season that when he really needs to commit and win a game, other than the Georgia game, but that was kind of just Ryan Williams doing his thing. Jalen
Well, that
Milroe
was
has
kind of
shown that
just
he's
Georgia blowing it more
right.
or less, if we're being real.
But
But
yeah, that's kind of wise that I just don't think Jalen Milroe is going to be able to perform in a high stakes situation like Cam Ward would. But that
and
being
although
said,
against lower level competition, Cam Ward still is a great quarterback and still comes through when he needs to. So
and then we move on to LSU. Why we have LSU right below Bama? LSU I still think is a good team. Little bit of a manhandling against Texas A&M, but it was in College Station, and LSU's got some good wins. Their loss to USC looks pretty bad now, but that was first week. I pretty much think it's just that I think we think that Alabama and LSU are pretty similar in
toss up rank,
it's a bit of
yeah,
a
and
toss up. But
they
I
play
think
this weekend, don't they?
I think what puts Alabama above LSU is just quality of wins, and I think Alabama
Right.
obviously has the better win with Georgia.
They still beat
So,
Georgia.
but this will be decided on its own this weekend, so there's not really much to say about this.
Yeah, this is another toss up that's going to be decided this weekend.
Now
So
moving on to who I think will probably be the Big 12 champion, BYU. But it goes to
you
show how
think
much
so?
faith we have in the Big 12 because their champion is number
Boys, you
14.
underestimate.
So the boys you underestimate, we
The
have at
boys you
14.
underestimate.
Just they're undefeated. They've played solid. A couple of rough games, but that win against Kansas State just to me continues to look better and better. And
Because
I
I
just
think Kansas State is a damn
and
good team.
BYU is just they play complementary football, and they got a good quarterback too. Got a really good quarterback. So I think they're better than Boise State because Boise State has a good pass rush, and they got obviously Ashton Genty, but I don't really think they have anything else going for them. I think if you commit to the run and you stop Ashton Genty best you can, you beat Boise State because I think there's just a lot of weight on Ashton and on Genty, and I just think that it's just you stop him, you stop Boise State, and I
Yeah,
hate
and we
using that
talked about this
mentality, but
before about the dimensionality of Boise State. Is their offense more than just that run game and Genty? And let's not get it twisted. Like they've got a good O line, they've got a good run scheme. Genty's the best, arguably, in college football right now, definitely by the numbers. So it's like, I mean, maybe that could be enough. Because some teams they make big runs with one dimensional offense if they have the right scheme, the right matchups, and the right players. Genty's that guy. So, but also the question comes with the defense too, because when State, if let's say Boise State gets in the playoffs, if and when they get in the playoffs, they're going to be playing some of the best offenses in the country, top level elite talent. You know, so Boise State has a great pass rush on paper, and I mean that pass rush does look good. Their defensive line is pretty good. But like in the sum of it all, when they start playing top level talent, like having what seems to be a one-dimensional offense and a defense that may crumble against these elite offenses, there's a lot of questions to be asked on Boise State's potency in this race. But I think they have, like, here's the thing. I bashed the AP for this logic simply because they contradicted their own logic. I still think the logic of them having a really close competitive game with Oregon, keeping them, in high
yeah.
regards, I think that's warranted. I only bashed the AP for doing it because they
Well, because
contradicted their own
they
logic
punished
by
Vanderbilt for the same reason.
the same exact loss, the same exact reason and type of loss they punished and knocked Vanderbilt out. So that was I still think that logic when not contradicted in
Well,
Boise
that's
State's
what we were
favor.
saying earlier,
Right.
anyways. Is that if a good loss
It's the
is, I
contradiction.
think a
Right.
good loss is an argument for keeping a team higher because, again,
When you're talking about a top 10 loss, of course.
if you
Yes.
have a loss that's well beyond your expectation at the time, you deserve to be. And
Yeah.
Boise State, like, I mean, I think Boise State's look good, and I think they're going to win their conference. I think they're going to go out and win 11-1, probably
I
go
think they're the
11 and
best group of
1,
five
10
team.
and
Yeah.
2, best group of five, and so that means that they're guaranteed to get into, like, if they win out their
If it
conference, they're
plays out like
guaranteed to
that,
get in the
yes.
playoffs. I think they'll be the G5 team that gets in the playoffs. So I think it's only fair we put them in the top 15 for now. And then next week we can start making our playoff predictions, and they'll probably find their way into mine, I think. So
And I think there's still some questions to be asked about a lot of these teams because a lot of teams have had weak schedules this year. And here's the weird part. We talk about that criterion of like, okay, dominating your weak schedules. There's so many ranked teams or so many teams that we think should be ranked between us and the AP and everybody else that have those weak schedules, but so many of them have not dominated those weak schedules. Now, once you get outside like the top 12, top 15, then it's like, okay, how do we gauge this at this
it
point?
is a bit of a crapshoot past
Because
these
like
top
you've got
15, I
like
think.
for example the AP 15, 16, 17, 18, Boise State, LSU, Kansas State, Pittsburgh, and even Ole Miss at 19. It's like 15 through 19 is a toss up for me. It's like how do we give the ups for these teams? Um, you know, obviously Boise State being where they are because of their close performance against the number one team, which is justifiable to an extent, you know. But it's like it's difficult. I still think the AP relies too much on face first, like face value sentiment, and they let win loss records be too much of the end all be all, and that whole you win, you go up, you lose, you go down. That absolute, I think it's flawed. But this, I guess, from this point, we'll say this is what we feel. Me and my co-host
Yes,
is the our best gauging of the top 15, the objectively correct screw you AP
objectively
poll,
correct. Yeah,
top 15 right now in college football. Um, and I still have questions for BYU, but
I mean, I have questions for BYU, Boise State, and LSU. Really,
yeah,
I have questions for them
our
because,
bottom
again,
three is yeah. And
it's
even
tough.
and even between Alabama and LSU, like we said, that's a toss up right now, and we'll find out this weekend. But
So
it becomes so cloud. I think it's so like the top 10 this year seems pretty clear cut, more or less. Sans Penn State and Notre Dame, but they have neither proven us wrong as far as them not being top, and they have neither proven that they are top yet.
yeah,
They passed the eye test and the record test. So we have to give them the benefit of the doubt. But the rest of the top 10 seems pretty clear cut. But like once you get outside the top 10, this season's so crazy because it becomes so cloudy. As I said, it's this season has been pretty crazy. Make no mistake, this has been a
yeah,
crazy season. I still think the AP's top 25 is wrong. I don't think Army should be 21. I don't think Washington State should be 22. I don't think Colorado should be ranked. Uh, I don't think Washington State should be ranked to go back on that. I don't think Illinois should be in the top 25. I don't think Washington State, Colorado, and Illinois, I don't think those are top 25 programs. I just don't. Um, SMU at 20. I mean, SMU looks like a pretty decent team. They passed the eye test. They got good wins. I think they're top 25 right now. I think they've made an argument for that, but I don't think Missouri, if Vandy's not in, Missouri shouldn't be in. But I mean, we've already talked about all that.
yeah. So
I really wanted us on that note to make our own Talk-Ons top 25 to kind of be a little petty and strike back at the AP, and we make our own full top
yeah.
25. But obviously, my pages window um, doesn't have a lot of space for all that. And
Well, we
we're
could have fit a
also
top 25, but it already takes us, 45 minutes just to do a top 15. So
right.
top
We've already
25
spent
would
enough
take us
time. I think we've made our
2 days.
points.
So yeah, I think we got what we need to. This is the Talk-Ons top
The
25 for this
official
week.
Talk-Ons top 20,
Week
top
10,
15, top 15
top
for week
15.
10.
Yep.
Also, before we go, guys, because we're closing now. But we will be doing. My co-host Dandy Vandy touched on this earlier. The Talk-Ons is going to start. We're going to try to hold ourselves to it. We're busy outside of this, which is why we've been somewhat inconsistent. But we really want to hold ourselves to it. For those of you who enjoy watching, we're going to do something a little interesting starting next week. We're going to start doing our playoff projections. So basically, starting next week, instead of doing the re ranks, maybe on top of the re ranks, we'll figure out a way to do it because I think the rankings as of now are still relevant going forward. But we're going to start giving our predictions and projections, if you will, on what the 12-team field will look like by the end of the season. So what
So
that
that
means
yeah.
is, yeah, it literally just means we're going to predict who we think is going to be the top 12 when the dust settles at the end of the season. We're going to start doing our top 12 projections
And
next week. So,
it's not going to be what we feel should be the top 12. It's what we think the committee's actually going to
right.
do. So how it's going to end up. So
Yeah, it's not going to be based on like our Talk-Ons top 15, which is the objectively correct
yes.
professional top 15 in our professional opinions. We're going to strictly be going by AP polls and remaining schedules and all those factors we'll put into account. We're basically just going to say who we think the committee is going to have in
And
the top
even
12, who makes it,
utilizing
basically.
past committee decisions as well,
Right,
putting
that
that into
too.
the
The
mix,
precedents have
such
been
as putting
set.
Alabama in the
So,
playoffs every time just because you want to. So, you know,
which,
we'll make sure to put a two-loss Alabama in there somewhere because they're definitely going to make sure a two-loss Alabama gets into a top 12 playoff.
and
So,
we'll save that for the actual conversation because, I mean, that's a good point, but save that for the actual show
yeah,
because what we are going to do is we stopped doing it because it took so long amongst all the other things that we wanted to cover in these videos. But part of like our Talk-Ons dynamic was supposed to be two brothers like arguing and debating over football. Um, so for the sake of time and like efficiency, we started pre-deciding, like making
yeah,
pre-decided top 15s like this one that we agreed upon beforehand to just go over for the sake of time and other topics. Well, with these playoff projection episodes, I think these are mostly just going to be about the predictions and projections.
yeah.
So, what we wanted to do was bring back that brotherly dynamic of art. We're going to debate and argue the top 12 field, who we think is going to make it in the top 12, where we think they're going to land, uh, all of that. So, I think it'll be interesting. I think it'll be
Well,
fun.
I think it's a good stopping point here. We went
It is.
longer than we wanted to, but
Sorry
you
for
know,
rambling and yapping.
we missed all of last week, so we had to try and catch up a little bit this week. And
And I mean, we always use that excuse, but we do it every other
that's true.
week. So I
That's
don't think
true.
we're ever going to be less than an hour at this
That's
point.
okay. Well, I think we've hit. No, we haven't yet, huh? Dang. All
No.
right.
Maybe the
Maybe one
playoff
day,
projections episodes. I mean, I think if we can be more consistent, we'll make them shorter. But I mean, it is a
if
podcast.
only.
You know, deal with it. If you enjoy watching it, thank you for lasting this long.
Yeah, if
If you
you've made it
didn't
this
last
far,
this
thank you
long,
once again.
right? And if you didn't make it this far, you're a loser, just like the AP poll. So
Oh man.
shame on you. But anyway, Crimson Cried has cried enough today, I suppose. So thank you guys for watching. Um,
Shout out to
oh,
Vanderbilt. Stay strong, boys.
stay
V's
strong, guys.
up.
They did y'all wrong, but V's up, V's up. Finish strong, finish strong. We love to see it. All
All
right.
right.
So that
Thanks for
that is
watching.
that
You know,
that has been it for today.
show some love to Vanderbilt, guys. They
I'm
deserve it.
kind of sleepy now, but anyway,
All
we've
right.
been yapping long enough.
Yeah, we're gonna continue
Uh,
yapping. So, goodbye,
all
everybody.
right. Anyway, happy Tuesday. We hope to be on schedule moving forward and be looking for the playoff projections episodes. I think it'll be
Uh,
interesting. Uh,
Thank you. And we're trying to end this.
thank you guys. Subscribe and please tune in for more. And we'll see
Hit
you on
that
our
bell and hit that like
hit
button.
that bell, hit that like button, hit that subscribe, and we'll see you guys in our what should be Thursday, our previews and picks for this weekend's upcoming big slate of games. So
Alrighty.
that'll do it. Anything
Dandy
else, Dandy
Vandy.
Vandy?
Nope. Dandy Vandy signing out.
10-4, Dandy Vandy. V's up.
Hey, Bandy.